I have a cult of my own, but let's not get into that. I'm your host Yusuf, and these are 10 chilling things you didn't know about Charles Manson. Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to get notified whenever we upload a new video. Anyways, let's get groovy, baby. Number 10, he never ended anyone. He created the Manson family, a cult of followers in the Californian desert in the late 1960s. Manson chose 4 of his most obedient comrades to launch an ending spree. The first victims were guests at the house of film director Roman Polanski, who was away at the time. Manson's followers butchered Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, writer Wojciech Frykowski and his partner, the coffee bean heiress Abigail Folger, and 18-year-old Stephen Parent, who had spotted the intruders. The next night, Manson directed another attack on supermarket boss Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. His followers also ended other people at other times and places, and Manson was also convicted for the passings of 2 other victims, Gary Hinman and Donald Shorty Shee. As horrifying as his treatment of others was, including that of his own followers, it's worth noting that Manson himself never actually removed anyone from the face of the earth. At least it's never been proven that he did. It's a pretty interesting distinction to make for a man who has been convicted of first-degree slaughter, but Manson's crimes actually served as a landmark case for what's known as execution by proxy, an act wherein a third party carries out an individual's premeditated butchery. Think hiring a hitman. While Charlie was nowhere near the scene of the famous Tate and LaBianca endings, he did mastermind both operations down to their finest details. The very fact that he was able to charm others into committing such gruesome acts puts Manson into a different echelon of psychopaths.
People look at you today.
After the brutal removal of actress Sharon Tate in August of 1969, the authorities started closing in on the Manson family.
To the person as thinking of her as just sexy, I would stop and I would think, well, how is she mentally, and what moves this into that? And therefore, I don't really think of the characters as being a sex symbol or sex goddess or whatever you would like to call it.
Less than 2 months later, police arrested 24 members of the burgeoning cult, including Manson himself. While in a Los Angeles County jail, Mansonite Susan Atkins bragged to another cellmate about the Tate execution, as well as claimed that the group had a celebrity hit list of who they'd end next. That list included names like Steve McQueen, Elizabeth Taylor, Frank Sinatra, Richard Burton, and Tom Jones. Number 8, he was abused as a child. Manson was born November 12, 1934 to a 16-year-old intimate worker named Kathleen Maddox. She did not identify the father or name of the child, so he was registered under no name Maddox. Eventually, she called him Charles. The last name Manson came from Kathleen's short-lived marriage to a man named William Manson. Charles Manson's father, Colonel Walker Henderson Scott, a farm laborer who claimed to be in the US Army. Ironically, Colonel was his first name. Once Manson's mother was pregnant, Scott left on army business and never returned. The story goes that Kathleen Manson took Manson when he was a baby to a bar and struck up a conversation with a waitress. The waitress joked that Manson was cute and that she would like to buy him. Kathleen replied, "A pitcher of beer and he's yours." Manson was left with the waitress until his uncle tracked him down a few days later and brought him home. After Kathleen's marriage ended, she teamed up with her brother Luther to rob people. Kathleen would lure men to Luther who would assault and rob them. In one case, they robbed a man with a ketchup bottle posed as a revolver. Number 7, he was a troubled kid. Manson grew up in extreme poverty, making Christmas an unhappy time of the year for him. One year, the only present he received was a hairbrush from his grandmother. The sight of other neighborhood kids with toys of all kinds drove Manson into a rage. He gathered all the neighborhood toys he could, stacked up some wood, and lit them on fire. When he was 9, Manson and his mother moved to Indianapolis, where she married again. While it seemed like his mother was turning her life around, things quickly went bad. Charlie responded to his chaotic home life by shoplifting and cutting class. In response, his mother sent him to the Giebelt School for Boys, a boarding school for delinquent kids. He escaped after being severely flogged, only to have his mother ship him off once more. After returning to Giebelt, Manson escaped once again and went on a crime spree, robbing cash registers to pay rent. A few weeks later, the police caught up with him and sent him to the Boys Town facility, made famous by the Mickey Rooney movie of the same name. After 2 more escapes and crime sprees, the state sent him to Indiana School for Boys in Plainfield. Number 6, he had some trouble in prison. With knowledge of his previous escapades, the guards made it their mission to make Charles's life a living hell. They regularly beat him and instigated brutal gang abuses by other inmates. The humiliation and psychological trauma here are a significant reason why Charles turned out the way he did. Despite the heightened security at the Indiana School for Boys, he escaped twice. On the second attempt, he made it all the way to Utah before being caught. Because he crossed state lines, they charged him with a federal crime and sent him to Washington, D.C. While there, he underwent a revealing psychological review. Despite a 109 IQ, he was illiterate and aggressively antisocial. Also, it reported that beyond all this lies an extremely sensitive boy who has not yet given up in terms of securing some kind of love and affection from the world. Every time he was released, Manson quickly went to crimes like pimping, robbery, and forging checks, and even parole violations that sent him back to prison. During this period, he was even married for a short period. Much like his mother, he could never make a marriage stick. In 1967, he was released from Terminal Island, Los Angeles, and moved to San Francisco, where he would start the Manson family. The thought of freedom deeply disturbed Manson. There was no safety net, and Manson had no idea what to do once he got out. On his release, he begged the officer escorting him out to let him stay. Number 5, how the Manson family started. Shortly after being released, Manson met Mary Brunner, a librarian in San Francisco, and moved in with her. His alternative worldviews offered a respite from her mundane life. Soon after, Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm joined their relationship, and they began traveling the West Coast, adding alienated young middle-class women looking for a world outside their boring middle-class existence. Intimacy was the primary motivator for Manson, but eventually, he began recruiting men like Danny DiCarlo and Tex Watson into the family. Alvin "Creepy" Karpis was part of the infamous Ma Barker gang during the Great Depressions. His exploits ended at least 10 people, and kidnapping many more earned him the FBI's public enemy #1 designation for a short period. While Manson was in Washington State Prison, Karpis taught him how to play guitar. This fueled Manson's desires to be a famous musician and obsession with the Beatles. Without Karpis, the Manson endings may have never happened. Number 4, how Manson acted. To many, it is unfathomable that an uneducated jailbird who spent most of his life in prison was able to build a cult around himself. Manson's charisma wasn't natural. He credits his charisma to the Dale Carnegie novel How to Win Friends and Influence People, which he read in prison. The book taught Manson how to make others take ownership of concepts and ideas that originated with him. Manson denies his followers items like glasses, watches, calendars, and clocks to keep them disoriented and malleable. His excuse was that these items kept them from seeing the world more naturally. Some of his followers had permanent squints from living without glasses. Manson and the family's initial goal was to make him a famous musician. Stars like Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, and eventually the Beatles were strong influences on his music. You may have even heard a song written by him without even knowing it. The Beach Boys, Guns N' Roses, Marilyn Manson, and Red Cross have all covered his songs. An early friend of the family was Deirdre Lansbury. The daughter of Executioner, she wrote Star, Angela Lansbury. Another friend was Beach Boy drummer Dennis Wilson, who they met hitchhiking in LA. The Manson family ended up living with him for a short period of time until Dennis couldn't handle it anymore. Dennis introduced Manson to producer Terry Melcher, who rejected Charles Manson's music. Melcher lived on Cielo Drive, which is why that location was picked as the target of the Sharon Tate executions. Number 3, how his cult got their ideals and how they got taken down. The White Album by the Beatles heavily influenced the cult's bizarre worldview. The family believed that a race war between whites and blacks would wipe out all the whites. The family would survive by hiding out in the desert until one day black society would beg Charlie to lead them. The clues to this were supposed to be in Beatles songs like Helter Skelter and Revolution 9. Interestingly, Charlie didn't even like the Beatles that much. Many indicators point to him not believing anything he was saying. The LAPD spent 4 months trying to find the LaBianca Tate butchers, but came up with nothing. They caught Manson and some of the family on an unrelated charge by chance, stealing cars and vandalism. While in jail, Susan Atkins bragged about her role in the crimes, implicating Manson and the rest of the family. Barbara Hoyt was a former Manson family member who became a witness for the prosecution. To stop her from testifying, she was lured to Hawaii and fed a hamburger with 10 tabs of LSD. Luckily, she realized what was happening and was able to get help. Later on, her testimony was critical in Manson's conviction. Number 2, his trial. The brilliant Manson thought that hiring a boring lawyer would help his case. He chose Irving Kinerick, who is well known for dragging court testimony and numerous court objections. Kinerick wasn't able to save him, and Manson received the execution sentence after a 7-month trial. Not all of Manson's followers ended up in prison, and many continued to follow him. In 1973, 4 followers attempted to rob a gun store in Hawthorne, California, and ended up in a gun battle with the police. They planned to break Charles out of prison with the weapons they stole. 2 years later, in 1975, Lynette Alice Squeaky Fromm, one of his most fervent followers, attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford. In 1972, the California State Supreme Court struck down the execution penalty as cruel and unusual in People v. Anderson. Everyone on Demise Row got bumped down to life in prison, including the Manson family. Number 1, his passing. Manson accrued quite the disciplinary record while in prison, racking up 108 serious violations by his final parole hearing in 2012. That's almost 1 violation for each point of IQ he has. This made him a significant target for other inmates. In 1984, another inmate doused him in paint thinner and lit him on fire. He survived, though 20% of his body was covered in burns. In 2013, news came out that 79-year-old Charles Manson was engaged to a 27-year-old woman named Afton Elaine Burton. In an amazing twist, it came to light that Burton only married Manson to lay claim to his body and put it on display. Manson called off the wedding, but weirdly, this didn't bother him too much. He seemed to really believe that he would never pass away. His passing in 2017 proved him wrong.
I don't accept the whole situation. Like I was in the desert minding my business. This confusion belongs to you. It's your confusion. I don't have any confusion. I don't have any guilt. I know what I've done, and no man can judge me. I judge me. What have you done, Charlie? I've stayed in the desert and run with the coyotes and ate off the plants and found out you could live out there without this society.
Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time.